Hello and welcome to this new series called the Practice Sleuths, where Adina and I look at various extracts that we've decided on, maybe some others that'll pop up as we go along. The topic for today is fingering, and I'm going to call this part one because I'm sure we'll return to this at some point later. But we've got various excerpts from the repertoire lined up, and we're just going to examine what if we do this fingering, what does this particular passage lend itself toward, how are we going to experiment and find a fingering that works for the individual, and then we'll demonstrate, and then we'll wind up with some considerations for fingering at the end. So how about if I hand you over to Adina now, and I know you've got a few things you wanted to say, and we'll sort of bat some ideas around.
Yes, sure. I just wanted to mention that fingering is not exactly the sexiest topic we could have taken for the first one of this series, but it is something that we all need. And as far as my experience is on multiple continents, it's not something that we're taught. Unfortunately, fingering is something that is established in the master-apprentice model, where you go to a great teacher with a big name who maybe has this fantastic pedigree, and they show you their secret fingerings. Or there's a lot of commerce out there involved. Different editors will release a different version of standard works and get money because they've added their comments and their fingerings. It's very, very important, however, that you not only look at different editions and see what feels good in your own hand. The difference between a good fingering and a bad fingering can be the difference between being able to play it securely in public, being able to store it well in memory, and for that you're going to need to have an element of your own personal preferences in your decisions. And so the idea that Graham and I had was to look at how are these decisions made, what are the options, and basically we're going to try to fill that niche in the practice repertoire of examining fingerings and see how wonderful it can be when you discover the one that works.
I love that you say that the fingering is individual. I've often found this with students, that a fingering that might work for me isn't going to work for somebody else. So when we're exploring fingering possibilities, I'll usually have them play version 1 and then alternate with version 2. Back and forth, and eventually what happens is the one that's right for them will win. They'll know after 3 or 4, alternations of the fingering what's going to work for them. Yes, because a lot of the time I find, especially when you've got an Urtext edition, an elite Urtext edition that's got fingering in, students tend to look at the fingerings on the same kind of level of authority as the notes and the rhythms that are from the composer. But even fingerings that are from the composer, and we do find sometimes, they're not sacrosanct either, because they fit that particular hand, but they might not be suitable for every hand. Well, they're not. So I don't think we should think twice about changing fingerings that we're given, even in Urtexts.
Yes, and whether we have an example for that today or maybe in the next session, sometimes it's a matter of taking the other hand even. So sometimes the score will be written that you think, I've got to take this note with the left hand, and you find out, oh, the right hand is in the neighborhood and can easily take it over, and suddenly an entire problem is solved. So let's get cracking.
Yes. So our first example is the Coucou, Le Coucou from Daquin. My spell check keeps changing it to couscous, so it's not. It's Le Coucou, the Coucou, which is by Louis-Claude Daquin. And let me just play the beginning of it. Fingering I wanted to look at is, I can actually share the screen here so that you can see where I am. Let me make sure I'm clicking on the right thing here. The fingering in this particular public domain score, I should add, if you look at where my mouse is, it's in the second system here. Let me just play slowly what they've got, if I can read it. 1, 3, 2, 1, which means you have to reuse the thumb on the repetition of the A. not in itself a problem, but now the fingering has changed a little bit here. What are they doing here? Yeah, so each repetition tends to use a different fingering, and it's because they want to avoid, this particular editor wants to avoid putting the thumb on the black key. However, let me just stop the share and come back into the room. However, I prefer the fingering where we use the same fingering for each bar. Now, it does mean putting a thumb on a black key. Now, in the old days, that was considered a no-no. Lots of things from the, our legacy rules, like we had to change fingers on repeated notes, we have to join legato by hand, all of that stuff. And one of the big rules was don't put a thumb on a black note. However, if we do that, let me just show you from bar 7, if you can see. Actually, I'm going to go back. I'll go back to bar 5. I'm going to do it slowly. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2 at the end of each bar. Now here's where the fun starts. 1, 2, 1, 2. 1 on the black key. Now you may think, well, isn't it uncomfortable to put a thumb on a black key? Wouldn't it be better to avoid that? Some editions, as you saw there, do avoid that, and in that moment you've got to learn a new fingering for a pattern that you've already played. Maybe I could just touch on how one does that, how one puts a thumb on a black key. It's really very simple. We've got long fingers and short fingers. So the short finger being the thumb, if I want to put it on a black key, well, thumb and pinky being the short finger, I just need to move in at that moment. Let me play you from bar 7 slowly. Move in and then back out again. So that for me is a much simpler fingering than trying to learn different patterns for each repetition of that sequence. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Absolutely, I'd like to pick up on that word pattern. The whole idea, I believe, too, about this particular fingering that you're suggesting, which, by the way, the very famous, never heard of, Louis Österle was the one who edited the Schirmer edition, and he did use that fingering. Mm-hmm. What I think is particularly good about it is it gives you the blocks, the chains, or we could call them sequences. That's the technical term for it. So you've got the whole technical sequence in one group. So what helps you is you've got a building block that's being repeated with the same fingering, which saves memory space, which makes the technical practice easier, and all in general, it reinforces the learning and makes it easier to store, as you were saying, so that when you come back to the piece, you have another score, your fingers are going to automatically do that. However, and I love to do this, let me address the other hand. Now, we discussed this briefly before. Sometimes the difficulty is not in the hand that we're working on it, but it's in the other one. Mm-hmm. So we spend all of this time working on that. We got the perfect fingering in the right hand, and then you see that you've got this left hand is, of course, playing throughout the whole piece. The left hand is the Kuckuck. Mm-hmm. And being that I live on a farm, I'd like to just mention that actual Kuckucks sound pretty angry. We're not talking about cute little birds here. We're talking about rather annoying, we're not sweet little birds, we're talking big kind of annoying birds. And if you know anything about birds, the cuckoos are the one that kick out the eggs out of the nest and put their big egg in there, and they're basically bullies, right? But what I think is important, that we want to make sure that these sequences that Graham has been showing you, that these are just little whiffs of air compared to this cuckoo call. Da-ba, da-ba. So again, any fingering that we're doing that's saving energy in the right hand is allowing us extra attention that we can devote to making sure that the cuckoo sound is coming out. So another thing is, in your version, Graham, and you don't need to put it back in, but I would just like to know, where is the slur line? Does your edition actually show these phrases starting with the second 16th note in the phrase?
No, I just found some because we had to be careful about putting copyright stuff on the internet. I just used a public domain score from IMSLP so that we wouldn't get into any trouble. But the edition that I'm using here is it just so happens it's grade 7 ABRSM. Associated Board of Royal Schools of Music, one of the selected pieces, and it's a very good edition, excellent scholarly edition. It does have the fingering that I personally wouldn't use, but I can see why the editor has used it. So he wants to avoid, he or she wants to avoid putting the thumb on the black key. So that rule has trumped.
But my question is there a slur line? Is there a phrasing line in that?
Nothing.
Okay, so the one I have is smart because it has as one phrase. So it's already giving you the hint. However, and this is again why we thought this would be such a really interesting topic, it has the wrong ornament in measure 4. What ornament do you have in measure 4?
Well, it's a tied trill, so slow motion would be, except that it's too fast for that, so one would do just a 3-note. Ideally, you'd put the trill afterwards, wouldn't you? But I don't think there's time.
Well, every way you've done it, the thing that's wrong in the edition that I've got, and this is a typical, and I can say this as an American myself, American versions, they don't have much, often they don't have the theory behind it. You do, what I've got is a repeat.
Yes, could be.
And I just think that's wrong. I mean, if you get into the nitty-gritty of Bach's ornaments, you would not repeat that note, as you said. First of all, there's no time for that, and the other thing is the ear is already hearing that F sharp, so why would you want to repeat it if you're using this ornament to get to the next note?
This is a very contentious issue, though, because some harpsichordists would absolutely repeat that if the tempo were right, if the tempo was slower, But I can see exactly that at the other side. We're playing it on an instrument where that sounds really clunky and clumsy. And yes, the line is going down. So yeah, I think we're ending up agreeing with each other there.
Right. So one last thing, because I was talking about the Kuckuck, is yours I have for the first theme, first time that the Kuckuck calls, I have staccato accent, right? And later I have though a slur.
Yes, that's editorial. That's Mr. Oesterle, isn't it? There.
Yeah.
The editor here, because this is such a good scholarly, based on scholarship, has put that marking in square brackets, indicating that it's editorial. There aren't any slurs later. You're thinking about there, right? There's nothing here. I would tend to play them staccato, but that would be open to experimentation, I think.
Okay, I just wanted to point that out because I think that the theme of the Kuckuck should stay the same call. And as I said, we're talking about a large angry bird wouldn't suddenly just get melodic and go slur dee.
Right. Yes. Good point. Right?
It would stay that kind of annoying. As I said, I've had many a breakfast disturbed by the sound of a loud cuckoo calling. Wonderful. We thought we would. We're looking forward to people sending in their questions, and we thought we would sort of stay in the bird realm and look at the bird as prophet, fool as prophet from Schumann. Here we've got maybe not the call, but we've got more of sort of a flying movement of the bird wing. So we've got a lot of small, we've got the held notes, and then we've got to get to the next one, as if you're getting to the next branch, jumping to the next branch. Mm-hmm. So the question is, I'm looking at the, if you don't count the upbeat, if I'm looking at from the second to the third bar, you have, and now this was a question that I wanted to ask. In my score, which is the Henley, supposedly the Urtext, so supposedly what the official version, there is no silent change of finger on it.
Yep.
Now, are you used to changing fingers there, Graham, from 1 to 5?
I have my own absolute, well, I wouldn't say patent way of doing it, but can I just say, Adina, I have the Bärenreiter, which is another elite urtext, and I like to look at who it was that's put the fingering in. This is a Rainer Schirmer, probably no relation to the Schirmer publishing house. So the fingering that they give here is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, substitute to a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then a sliding off from the thumb to the thumb, substitute. I wouldn't do this fingering. But tell me go on, I'm interfering with your...
No, but that's the fingering that I wrote in myself. So, because I personally like sweeping down, switching, and first of all, we have a pedal. We've already progressed from Bach's era. But the other thing is, for me, the most important thing is the movement of the wing.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's hear your argument. So
right.
those of you listening who enjoy that and enjoy switching, that's the word, switching, and don't find it a challenge. I find it a way to balance the hand so that the fingers are light for the quick notes.
Yeah.
Let's hear what Graham has to say.
I think this is fascinating because I'm often telling students to just research some of these questions, and by going on somewhere like YouTube, you can even slow down the speed of the playback so you can really see what people are doing. I'm talking about, elite performances, so you can slow the speed down by half or by a quarter. And of course, when you go into quarter speed, you don't get any of the music, but you can see exactly what people are doing. You can even, if you're clever, you can look at the dampers and see what the pedaling is. So my feeling with this is that exactly everybody has their own preference. But what I would advise is, okay, how am I going to preface this? I think we were all brought up with the notion that a legato line, anything with a slur over the top of it, means that there has to be a physical legato. And that seems now to be being challenged in the pedagogy world, where are we connecting by foot or are we connecting by hand? And I personally would prefer a fingering where I release the hand. So if I did it without the pedal, it would sound like this: 5, and then... So I've got the groups in one hand position, and then when I add my pedal, and I find that convenient.
So you're taking the musical pickup to the next note.
Yes, da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da.
Right. So we're not actually disagreeing in the effect we want. We're just disagreeing. We're just disagreeing in how to get it, because it's basically you've landed. Let me use my twig, and now you're flying to the next one. And that's so. However you get there, and we would encourage everybody to try it out and see what feels best for their hand.
Exactly.
But the idea is you've reached the twig, you've reached the long note, you relax the hand, and you do the best fingering that fits your hand to get down to the next twig. Right?
Yes.
That allows you to use whatever are your strongest fingers to make sure that you're getting all the little notes, and that's not a problem. But let me come back to what you said, because it's so important. The problem is that in musical notation, we have these slurs, and that was one of the questions I asked about the Kuckuck. We have slur lines that identify, in some cases, just a measure or a motif, or they're telling us to play legato. And unfortunately, with many beginners, they see the slur, as you were mentioning, and it's like, oh my God, these are all supposed to be connected. Mm-hmm. And we're ignoring either we've got another hand, we've got the effects, the psychological effects of a long note sounding like it's connected to the next, because the overtones of the piano are still sounding with or without pedal. And these are all considerations that can lead us to choose what works best for our hand.
Definitely. And interestingly, I was giving a lesson earlier today on the G-flat Impromptu of Schubert, where the person was wanting to hold on manually to this B-flat. and I could see that the hand was getting compromised. There was a little tension creeping in, and I simply suggested that perhaps the pinky finger could release the B flat since the pedal has got it. There's absolutely no point in holding on to that B flat. Here as well. Now you may find in a spot like that, where you've got the quarter notes on the top, that actually it's preferable to connect them. It's easier to get the sound you want. But I think we're now beginning to challenge that notion, because as you say, these little slurs can indicate the grammar of the music, like that's a phrase, or they can indicate the articulation of the music. And if we're looking at some editions, some sort of 19th century editions of the classics, they tend to put these great long phrase marks over, which is very confusing. It's totally against the style of the period, which never would be thought of as long lines. Yeah, so I think.
But just a second, Graham. Let me jump in. I'm not going to attempt to play by heart what you just played, but I think that I would, if I were in that lesson, I would have said, let's practice releasing the top note and feel what it's like when the hand is relaxed because it's not in that extended position. Mm-hmm. And then I would go back and say, how much do I need the extended note as an anchor for where I am to create this harp-like arpeggio in between? And what I believe is really important is I'm training, when I release it, I'm training the rest of the hand to say long note, relax, quick notes, harp, playing the harp, sweeping over the harp. And whether I use that later by faking it with the pedal or by holding the long note, I'm still training the rest of the hand to feel as if this harp is an easy thing that is as easy as a harp would be to just strum the strings, except that we pianists are doing much more work. I had to stick that in there.
Yeah, and since we're speaking of harp, I'm thinking about the Chopin Opus 25 number 1, where you've got these long notes on the top, that I don't think it would be feasible to hold onto. You can't join them. So that they have to be released, whether we like it or not. But we're still aiming for that long legato line.
And again, this would be a piece where I would, even though I am releasing them, I would make sure that I would be telling myself, long note, relax.
Yes, totally.
Relax. Yeah. Because that message will be something that I'm indoctrinating myself with, that I'm in training, I think is the technical word, and that will then happen on stage, that I have moments of relaxation, especially in the Chopin Etudes. It sounds like we're almost about to hit Chopin, but we wanted to get to Beethoven next. But especially with the Etudes, so important in the sense of a musician's medicine aspect to make sure that I'm building in the relaxations.
Yes.
But I think we really can go to Beethoven now and then come back to Chopin, because Beethoven has enough technical challenges on his own.
Shall I go to the Beethoven? Let me just grab my score. So we're talking about Opus 109, E major sonata, and we're looking at the last movement, variation 3. Shall I just put the score up here now so we can see what we're doing? I think we can graduate from this cuckoo. Let's see. We were going to do the Bach, but we don't have to do that. Maybe we won't have time to do that today. Beethoven, where are you? Here we go. So this is the Händler edition. I have doctored the fingering. I didn't like the fingering that I saw because, again, it had an avoidance of putting a thumb on a black key. Actually, this is very similar in principle to what we were looking at with the cuckoo. So I've got one fingering, which I replicate for 3 measures. And it does involve putting the thumb on a black key. It does involve that, but it's no problem if I'm moving correctly, if I've choreographed that passage. But if we look at, let's say, the next example of the same...
Wait a sec. Oh, that's another example of fingering. I was just going to ask you, but I can use this score too. You're using basically the chunk, so you've got 3 to 5.
Let me go back.
And then you go 3 to 5, and then you've got 3 to 5, and then you have 3 to 5 if I take the main notes.
Yes.
See what I'm saying? Right. And I would just like to point out to all of those listening that this is the melody that's hidden there. For all of this,
yes.
right? So for all of this noise that's going on in the left hand, we've got a hidden melody. And this is one of those considerations, I call them considerations for the fingering. How can I automatically, and that's why I like the fingering that you're suggesting, Graham, because you've got pretty strong fingers, like the third and the fifth. You've actually started to phrase it unintentionally through, well, intentionally and unintentionally, whatever you want to call that. It's sort of a collateral damage, or I'm looking for the opposite. It's an advantage of the fingering you're using because you're actually bringing out that melody, which is the anchor that the listener needs to know this isn't a random set of measures. This is actually the theme in another variation.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, it comes down to why learn different fingerings for the same pattern when you can use just one. So, I mean, the way I phrased it there is not, it's more groupings. That kind of sense. But of course, one would practice it. And here's where we probably should avoid getting onto the subject of, putting the stresses in all sorts of different places. All sorts of different types of grouping for practice. I'm a great fan of that sort of thing. But I just wanted to look at the next fingering. This is from Schnabel, and I particularly like Schnabel's editions to use as a secondary source because he's got his own stuff in small print. So he says non troppo legato. And interestingly, he puts a great big phrase mark over in the left hand when Beethoven puts nothing. So that presumably that's indicating the grammar of the phrase rather than the articulation there. But you see these staccatos that he's put in there on those thematic notes, as you say, Adina. So his fingering is a different philosophy. I don't even think I could do it. Thumb, thumb, thumb. He's putting thumbs all over the shop there.
Okay, so what I like about this, though, is just that he's got the melody notes, as you were saying, staccato.
Yes.
So at the latest then, I would say, if I hadn't seen it before, because I always look at a variation and I say, are we looking at a variation, the harmony is staying the same, going back to the Bach-Goldberg variations, do we have a thematic variation or do we have a harmonic variation? Do we have the ground structure? What is the listener unconsciously taking with them in their listening experience when I play this? Absolutely fascinating.
Yes.
So, but before we run out of time, let's double back to Bach. That was my misreading my notes. I don't want to deprive us of Bach. So.
Well, it was really just I was. When you've been teaching over the years and people bring the same pieces back and you realize, various different students, you realize that there are certain traps in certain pieces where you can almost predict there's going to be an issue. And very often in certain pieces, the student will say, but just before they play, and I have a problem and I know exactly where they're going to say, yes, you mean bar 25, of course. You're not the only one who has a problem with bar 25. So with the B flat invention of Bach, the number 14, there's a spot, I can give you exactly where it is. It's the last beat of bar 13. Sequence until the middle of measure 16, which actually is for me one of the Q spots in this. Q spot being a quarantine spot, the sort of thing where you'd want to engage in all sorts of different types of practice. Actually, I think I've got a slide of it. Let me just show that. Okay. Where did it go? Here it is. Now, you'll have to excuse my scribbles on here, but what I recommend people do is, even if eventually one is going to articulate maybe something like, make a little gap there. Not as much as that, but let's say you wanted to break those groups up. I recommend a legato fingering, even though we may articulate eventually, because I want to feel connections here and here. I want to feel the extensions, the contractions in the hand. And I would hasten to add that I'm not a believer in stretching the fingers at all, but we would get there very comfortably with the fingering that I've engineered here. Contract, extend, but immediately close up. So then I've got a physical connection between every note. And then afterwards, if I want to, if I feel like I want to, I can release, but with the benefit of having felt the joins.
So here I think it's important. I think that there's a unisono feeling to this passage.
Mm-hmm.
And so I personally find it helpful if my hands are playing unisono, that they are parallel. In your case, you have 4 and 1 together. You have right hand, forehand, left hand, 1, I believe. I was just looking at.
Yes, that's right.
Right. So I think anything that reinforces the idea of these are parallel notes. Again, I'm saving energy in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
I've got the hands are doing the same thing. They're just starting with a different finger.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, I just have to jump in and ask you something as a non-scholar. I did hear once that in Bach's time, they did not use thumbs.
Yeah, Bach did use that. Absolutely, he did. He had to have. You mean on the black keys? Yes.
No, at all.
No.
I've seen historic performances where the thumb is hanging down because the thumb was not considered a finger, and
Right.
people were playing just with 8 fingers. I just wanted to get your take on that because this could be, going pulsing through the internet. This idea that Bach only had 8 fingers. I agree with you. I cannot imagine the gorgeous music that he produced with only 8 fingers. I wouldn't even know how that would work.
I think that tradition would have originated on something like virginals or perhaps a clavichord where you've got very small, what's the short keys, so you don't have the benefit of the length of the keys as we have now. But it wouldn't be possible to play without using the thumbs. But I think the virginalists, the Elizabethan guys, probably did avoid thumb. But I'm not sure that it was an absolute. I'm not really aware of where that originated and when it ended. But I think Forkel talks about Bach using the thumb. There's something in the biography. But one thing I would say about that, Adina, I don't know if we should venture into the practice area briefly, maybe for a moment.
Yes, that's funny. That was telepathy. I was just going to say, let's talk sequences and chunks. And actually, I would like to know how you would practice this without all of the small, oh boy, how many? Semi, demi?
Yeah, whatever those things are called, yes. Well, you see, I noticed that Bach has put a stop at the beginning and the end of each group. So there are 6 notes. Stop, go, stop, stop, go, stop, stop. So my feeling, being playful in practice is, what would it feel like if I first of all smoothed that out so I didn't have any stops? And then perhaps inserted stops in different places. So maybe, I can't do it. I'm enjoying that. I didn't want to stop. It gives me something different to think about and to listen for and to feel during practice, so that I don't end up kind of habituating to one way of doing it. So I'm sort of taking part in the creative compositional process. Why didn't he write that? Why did he write that? Don't know what you think of that.
I was just going to say what I would actually practice, and speaking and playing at the same time, and remembering that this is not in B, but in B flat. Make sure I get the the right accidentals. I would actually practice it also like this.
Ah, yes.
So I would get those resting notes in my head, the harmony in my head, and I could actually, if I had written in the fingering, which I didn't because I wanted to have a blank slate, but then I could also see if I'm practicing the same fingerings that I'm going to be using later.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Right? And then you can just...
block it.
Block it.
Yeah.
Just ideas.
Very nice.
It reinforces the melody that we're trying to transmit. It makes the very small, almost threatening black notes. I love it when beginners look at a page like this and they go, that is way too dark. I'm never going to be able to play that.
Yes.
But it simplifies it, and it tells us, to go back to the psychology of this, we are never going to read those little notes when we're performing it.
No.
So we have to create these chunks, we have to create these groups, we have to create these sequences, and anything we do when we're practicing it that makes it seem as, oh, this is just really easy. This is just hopping from one stepping stone to the next, with a little bit of fluff in between.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. That's great.
Okay. So we've really, we really should sneak in a few seconds of Chopin, because that's, the whole idea behind an etude, as we mentioned at the top, was that we're working on our technique, but in a musical way. Yeah. And Graham has chosen a really interesting example. So let's as a final note for today, let's take a look at the Chopin.
This is just the merest snippet of the Opus 10 number 1. Just to preface this, so when I was a student, I had a wonderful year at Peabody in Baltimore, where my main teacher was Anne Shine. I mean, what an absolutely amazing lady and an amazing pianist. A student of Arthur Rubinstein, who only taught 2 people, I believe. And I was struggling with, as I'm sure many pianists have struggled with Opus 10 number 1 Chopin. And there was one particular position, and she stopped and said, Arthur would do it this way. I'll show you the spot here. Let me just share. And a lot of people are going to think, oh, that's cheating. I don't consider it to be cheating. Now, if you look at Chopin's fingering for that, that's stretchy, really unkind. We've got these stretches between the fingers. If you would do the upper fingering, obviously it needs pedal, but all that involves is a closed-handed position, and then... and all one has to do is to shift across, and I managed to keep my hand closed. So here's a good example of where the composer's fingering is probably not going to be optimal.
Right, and you also have something that we talked about at the very beginning here. This is almost like a secret recipe for curry, right? Nobody's going to give you their curry recipe, but if you're lucky enough to have the experience of an extremely good teacher who's passing on either their own inspiration, their own discovery, or something that's just been passed along, with like notes in class over the generations of this is an easier way to do it. And again, we have the same principle of we've got something in the hand and then a change.
Yes.
So we can actually practice this in blocks. Again, it'll be easier to store, and we will not be creating the tension before we start to play that.
Absolutely. And it's just the philosophy of the closed hand, I think, that's for me so important, that we want to try and avoid these stretches. And it's very often possible to avoid if we just rejig fingering that gives us those stretches, which are no good for anybody.
Not to forget that these pieces have melodies and emotion in them, and if you're only concerned about stretching and hitting the keys, you can only play it mechanically. You have no extra energy left to attend to the gorgeousness of the piece.
Absolutely. Well,
So Graham, we could
Yes.
We've really had more examples than we could pack into one session, so we're going to be looking forward to everyone's comments and suggestions for passages that they need help with. But let me come back to, let's zoom out and take the bird's eye view. We did start with birds, let's end with birds.
Ah,
If we take the bird's eye view, what are we considering when we look at fingering? So I have a couple of things, and then Grandma, I'll ask you to jump in, but I would say the first thing we want to do is make sure that we're not, to start with the last example first, that we are not overstretching the hand. So we're looking for ways in which it feels comfortable, it can be easily stored. We have chunks we can work on. We're simplifying the music for ourselves. We're making sure that it's something that will feel good. Excuse me for jumping out for a second, but it's just amazing considering that I don't have my scores here. And I just have some random copies that I bought in lockdown that didn't have fingerings, but the good fingerings, they stay in your hand. You don't remember where you got them, you don't remember how you came about, but suddenly you can play that piece by memory, even if you're looking at the score, because the fingering is still there. And I'd like to give a small shout out to a former student of mine, whom I really enjoyed, but every time she came, she played with a different fingering. And it was basically sight reading every time. So why is fingering so important? We don't want to sight read, we want to actually store this. We want to have motor patterns. We want to have enough attention to be transmitting emotions and the intentions of the composer, and not still struggling or looking for a hit and miss fingering on the spur of the moment. And it was amazing how right, names will be changed to protect the innocent. I'm just going to say Mary. How Mary was constantly in every lesson improvising on the spot with the fingerings. And yes, she had hit the notes, but it was nothing she could use for performance, nothing that was secure. So again, we're looking for chunks. We're looking to underscore the phrasing. We're looking to ways in which the melody can come out without extra effort, because we're using either heavier or stronger fingers for that, or we're using a phrasing that is automatically giving us an upbeat. And we're reducing the dangers, especially, Grandma said this before, if you look at my hand, I have a small hand, but I have a wide hand. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have a student who's going to have maybe a more narrow hand and very long fingers so they can reach something else. Yeah. You're going to have those who have a monster claws, right? Yeah. where a tenth is an easy thing, and for them there will be a different fingering, and for everybody out there who's listening, it really pays to experiment.
Yeah, I mean, this is so true, because everybody's hand is different. So how can you have the everyman fingering? The fingerings that we see in the books are really just suggestions, and as you can see from some of the examples here, even those from the composers, I mean, we pay them the respect to try the fingering out. But yes, and I couldn't agree more. For me, the fingering is based on individual comfort and also things like articulation, phrasing. I mean, I just sprang to mind 333 Mozart. You know, I wouldn't want a legato fingering because I want a little articulation there. So I find a fingering 4, 3, 2, 1, and then just scoot across to 3 and try to play legato. And it gives me just a little bit of articulation. So the music itself, in that instance, dictates the fingering. What else was I
Right, and the break between it, the almost staccato, let's say tenuto note, comes out automatically without extra effort.
Yes,
absolutely.
Don't have to think about it, and that's of course the trick. Is in the performance, we don't want to have to worry about what finger goes where. So once we've worked out our fingering, I'm a firm believer in sticking to it. Your student sounds like it would be a nightmare if I were to walk on stage and not know which fingering I was going to do. I'd be well, I don't think I'd want to do that.
Well, and maybe as I'm suddenly thinking of Walter Norris, who used to practice. He would say, okay, this is Tuesday or Wednesday. Today is, doesn't really matter. This day of the week, I'm going to just leave the third finger out. And he would play very difficult Beethoven sonatas without the third finger, just to see how can I get to the note. Why? Not to practice that, necessarily to entrain that, but when he went back to the normal fingering, suddenly it felt so much easier.
Yeah.
So fingerings are more just numbers on the page that we have to watch out for. They are things that we are storing, and they really definitely need to be addressed. And there's something we can come back to later when we find that a passage isn't working. I'm not a believer in if you play it once with a different fingering, it's going to be in there forever. It really pays to experiment and
Mhm.
maybe even to take a break from a piece and say, okay, when I come back to it, I'm going to use this new fingering steadily so that it becomes the new motor pattern that I need for
Yeah, yeah,
performance.
yeah, totally. I love the idea of experimenting. Well, I think we've probably covered everything we wanted to cover, haven't we, Adina?
Well, we've covered everything we could do in the time that
The
we felt
time,
that people
yes.
would have the attention to pay attention. But we're looking forward, as I said, to those of you out there who listen to this, sending us your difficult passages when it comes to fingering so that we can maybe address them in the next, not the next, but in a additional session at some point where we come back to this topic because it certainly wasn't exhausted today.
Ah, we barely scratched the surface. And yes, as Adina said, put your suggestions in the comments below, and we will look at those. And if at all possible, we will address them in some future episode. So all that remains for me to do now is to thank Adina for her expertise and her ideas and thoughts. And also, before we sign off, I believe you've got a prop that you'd like to just share with us.
That's right. Yeah. We are, this is, as we mentioned at the beginning, we are launching the practice sleuths. So we will be taking more than just this under the microscope and hopefully getting you inspired to do so in your own practice.
Yes, that's
Thank
what
you,
it's about.
Graham. Thank you, Graham, for all the preparation, for all the ideas, and for putting up with my interruptions. And look forward to the next session with
Yeah,
you.
me too. Take care, everybody. See you soon.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.